some of the principles. In the Aloha Spirit booklet that we have, which is free to anybody who wants to send for one, or anybody here who wants to pick one up, it's a book about blessing, but in the front cover we have a list of the 7 principles. And we do courses and articles and all kinds of stuff based on those principles, but you pick the one, all power comes from within. So essentially what this means is the idea that we are all connected to the same source, and that everything we do comes from inside of us and from that source. Now, how we use that is our own personal thing. We can use it to heal, we can use it to harm, but it's all that power is coming from the same source. And we often use that to remind people that of the very effective idea that their problems are not somebody else's fault. They created the problems, probably not on purpose, but it was a power of theirs that created the problems, because the problem is their reaction to the situation. Might not be a problem, same situation might not be a problem for somebody else. So the problem is coming from within themselves, and because of that, the solution can come from within themselves. So that they don't have to feel helpless in any situation. Oh, that doesn't mean some things won't be terrifically challenging. But if it's in their experience, the possibility of finding a solution is within them too. Sometimes that solution means grabbing somebody else and getting their help. It doesn't mean as an isolated individual you have to do everything. Because if we're all one, grabbing somebody else is grabbing another part of yourself that may have more knowledge. It's just like the liver saying, trying to pump and breathe. Say, I'm really having a hard time, I can't do this. Well, get the heart and the lungs, for crying out loud. You know? They're part of you too. So just like in our life, the power from within is not the power to do everything with our own individual body. It's to find a solution, which may involve getting a lot of other people involved in creating the solution. Using what's available, using what others have done, and using nature as well. Okay? But taking the initiative and not blaming someone else for your inability to act, or thinking that the power is outside and forcing you to be or do a particular thing. That's how we use that idea. Yeah.
Can you talk about ways that the Hawaiians would tap into the power of nature, whether the Hawaiians or the Hawaiian shaman?
Would tap into it?
They could tap into it.
How to tap into the power of nature? How was that used by the Hawaiians or the shamans, Hawaiian shamans? Very much the same way that it's been done all over the world. One of the most powerful techniques that humans use for connecting with something, in technical terms it's called to anthropomorphize it, to humanize it, to give it a name and often a personality and a legend connected with it and all kinds of stuff. To, if you put it simply, to humanize a force of nature. And when you do that, then you can call the wind Mariah and all of that kind of stuff. Most of you have heard that song. If you listen to that, he's talking about a place where we call the wind Mariah and we call the fire this and we Tess, I think, and there are names given to these elements. This is very common. Well, here in Hawaii it's exactly the same thing. The elements have names, and the extended meaning of these elements also have names, and they're treated as being alive. And so to tap into the power by making such a connection, by, in the Hawaiian shaman tradition, making friends with, in many traditions and even religions have grown up about this, where there is a sense of worship, which is, yeah, that's a power and that's alive and it has great power, but it's over there and I'm over here, and so we'll worship it and we'll hope that it will be nice to us. It was different here. It wasn't that kind of distancing. It was more of a sense of getting to know it real well, treating it with great respect as if it were an elder, or treating it with a more casual great respect as if it were a friend. Right? And by doing that, you become familiar with the power and you become able to influence it. In this tradition, it was never a sense of control. There's a whole Western magical tradition built upon the idea of controlling nature. Actually, there's a whole scientific Western tradition built on the same thing, on the idea of controlling nature. Right? But here it was harmonizing with it, making friends with it in order to influence it. To influence it and to gain its influence in your life. So that you could, let's take the wind. Being able to influence the wind was very handy in the case of hurricanes or sailing or lots of things like that. But also, if you could make friends with the spirit of the wind, then you could bring those wind-like qualities into your life to blow away all the negativity, to increase your energy, to bring you knowledge from faraway places, to carry your messages out to where you wanted them to go. All kinds of other uses. Now here's the beautiful part. From a typical typical Western scientific, because not all Western scientists are like this, but from a typical Western scientific point of view, that of course is nonsense. And all that's saying is that Western scientists have a belief that it's nonsense. That's all that says. Okay? And so they can't make use of all that power in that way. Because they don't believe it has any power, they don't believe it's something with any intelligence at all, they don't believe they can make connections at this emotional or mental level, and so they don't. And so all that's cut off. Now if you have a way of thinking which says that this is alive and I can make connections with it, then a most wonderful thing happens. You can influence it. And you can allow it to influence you. And it happens and it works. Okay? But it doesn't fit the Western model. And so of course there's great skepticism and laughing about it and great conditioning in the Western education not to do such things. And so people are still laughed at, you know, they talk to rocks. Yeah, right, they're weirdos. And meanwhile, the person who's talking to rocks is having all kinds of great stuff happen, okay? And all these weirdos aren't getting any part of it. Okay? Not because they couldn't, but because they have one belief system. I like to hear some Hawaiians speaking every once in a while, and they'll talk about Western mythology. And what they're talking about is Western science, okay? But see, mythology can work. That doesn't mean Western science doesn't work, but it's a mythology. It's a belief system. And because they believe in it so well, it works for them. Okay? I'll explain this a little more. I'm on a roll. We have, in our experience, things that happen. Hey, we can all agree to that, except some of us can see and feel things that others can't. But nevertheless, there's a lot of things that can happen that pretty much everybody can experience. Right? That's a given. Sun lights up the day. Okay? That's pretty much common human experience. Gravity. We call it gravity, but gravity, we have a phenomenon, let's say, that only allows us to jump so high before coming back down. There is a phenomena in which things that are up tend to fall down. Now, in Western science, that's called gravity, and then they've made all kinds of observations and made all kinds of rules about gravity. But all that's really happening is, here's this phenomenon that's happening, and they've looked at it in one particular way and made interpretations about it. And in doing so, bypass the other part of gravity, which is levity. Now that's the actual other part, which is kind of funny, and that's a joke too. But Levity is what people call levitation, also exists. It happens all the time. You can, by learning how to use your mind in a particular way, make yourself lighter. You can look at it as something like a sequoia tree, which impossibly carries sap to the very tops of its branches. And redwoods also. Redwood trees can reach about 300 feet high. I've seen some calculations that say, according to the laws of gravity, it can't do that because of the weight of the sap. And the tree, of course, having not studied the laws of gravity, goes ahead and does it. Right? We have classical things like the bumblebee, which is not supposed to fly by aerodynamic rules. And it does it still. Okay? There are other forces already operating, but because of a certain mindset that only looks at things in a certain way, it's very hard for them to tap into these other forces, which exist because the phenomena exist. The way that Western science has chosen to look at the world is an incredibly rich and exciting and useful way. I mean, I'm not going to give up my computer, okay, unless I have to, for any reason. It's fabulous. But it's only one way of looking at the world. If we could tap into and study other ways of looking, instead of trying to conquer nature, if we could use and develop a science of working with nature, of getting nature's living, intelligent cooperation, then without using stimulating chemicals, we could get greater crop yields. We could talk trees into shaping themselves before they were cut. Okay? I mean, there's an awful lot of stuff that's been done that way by certain kinds of agriculturalists who have done that. Luther Burbank, George Washington Carver, they operated that way by connecting at a different level with nature and having incredible effects. Seedless grapes exist because Burbank spoke to the grapes and said, look, you don't have to grow seeds, I'll take care of you. Now, he did that over and over until they were convinced. And each time he got grapes with fewer seeds, he would mate them with other grapes. In other words, so he was doing physical things in addition to talking to them and coaxing them and treating them as living beings. And that's where seedless grapes came from. Right? You can look that up if you like. Right? It is possible to have a whole different relationship with nature. It's possible, probably, to have the equivalent of the computers that we have in a much different way. You realize, just take one thing, one of the most fabulous beings that we have on this planet that we hardly know anything about are trees and mushrooms. Now, for a while it was thought that there was a particular mushroom which was the biggest plant on Earth, because when they really began to study this thing, they discovered that it was all over the place, the same mushroom, connected root system. And then they discovered a bigger plant than that. Not only a bigger plant, but a plant that communicated with itself, okay, and all different parts of itself, and that's the aspen tree. When we see the aspen tree on a mountainside, especially in the fall with those beautiful yellow leaves among the pines, they have this incredible underground system that for miles connects all these aspen trees. There are other trees not connected that when certain kinds of things are happening to the trees, and trees sometimes have a way of putting out aromas or chemicals, call it whatever you like, that will in response to environmental conditions. And there are some trees that when trees at one part of the forest are threatened, independent trees at the other side of the forest will start putting out these chemicals in preparation for the threat. And there's no, as far as we know, any underground system physically connecting them. Okay? Is it a chemical communication? Well, even if it were, wouldn't that be fabulous? If we could have, we have all these cellular phones, we wouldn't have to build outrageous towers on top of a beautiful mountain if we had a different way of communicating over a distance. So there's all kinds of stuff that we could learn from nature by looking at it in a different way, thinking about it differently, developing a different kind of science, if you like. The potential's there. The one we have does a lot of great things, but it's only one way to do things. That's my big point.